as a significant client of W&A, if I was sitting in the audience tonight, the first question I would ask me is, David, why didn't you go to cash? And so here's an investor who believes he has a prudent investment strategy of padlocking his briefcase. And while that may be a prudent investment strategy, there are others. And so let's look at ours and see if ours is prudent. Our philosophy begins with a financial planning philosophy. And so here are the steps that we take as we build out this financial plan. First, we analyze your particular financial circumstances. We diagnose your particular financial needs. We derive, as I said, a targeted rate of investment return, what we're trying to achieve given all the inputs. And then we use forecasting tools to construct portfolios with the highest probability of achieving that target rate of return over time. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, can probability analysis be trusted? That's something else I think this time has brought to our minds. And so let's do a case study. Let's assume we've got somebody who's 60 years old and they've got a 40-year investment time horizon. Why? Because at W&A, everybody gets to live to 100. And so nobody's ever come back at us on that. I'll let you know if that occurs. So we've got a 40-year investment time horizon. Let's say this individual's got $1 million portfolio, and we've decided to allocate it 70% to stocks, 30% to bonds. This individual needs a 4% withdrawal rate, which of course we'll have to adjust for inflation. And over time, we've lived in a 3% inflationary world. And so here's our case study. We take this and put it into our probability simulation tool. And in that tool contains a data set. And the data set that we draw upon began in 1921 and extends all the way through 2008. Okay? So think about it. The data that we're using there, actual stock and bond market returns, contains the Great Depression. It contains the 70s. It contains the early 80s, which were kind of nasty, and every other event, 1987, you name it, it's in there. Okay, using that as the data set, we run about 10,000 trials, which creates a bell curve. Going back to our inputs, we need a 4% withdrawal rate, 3% inflationary world. We've got $1 million, and the objective that the client stated was, I don't want to run out of money, period. So our wealth goal is to have $1 on our 100th birthday. That's what we're trying to achieve. For those of you who are clients, you'll recognize this is the output of our simulation tool. Now, I'm not going to make you study this too closely, but I will tell you how it works. On the left side of the chart is purchasing power. So the probability of having $1 million with those inputs 40 years from now, according to the tool, is 75%. And so just maintaining your purchasing power level, according to the tool, 75%. But that's not what we asked. What we asked was, I don't want to run out of money. What's the probability I have at least $1? And that ends up being 88%. So I'm on an airplane going from somewhere to somewhere else, and I'm reading one of the books that's in the bibliography in front of you. It was Muhammad Al-Arian's When Markets Collide book. And I got smacked in the face with a sentence that read as follows: do not be blinded by the median. I mean, I almost made him pull the airplane over so I could call the planning department and say, oh God, I hope this really works, As soon as we got on the ground, because, if it didn't work, then our whole system might be flawed. So as soon as we got on the ground, I called John Phillips, I think, and I said, I need you to pretend that W&A's been in business since 1926 and that we've been advising people in this $1 million scenario, 70-30 portfolios, 4% withdrawal rate, that is the recipe for success over 40-year time frames, and I need you to tell me in actual time frames how well they did. Here is that output. And so these are the actual 40-year results. So had we told you that, in 1926, by the end of 1965, you had plenty of purchasing power, and moving forward, if there's any surface area in the chart, those were successful outcomes. And so the actual data says, incorporating all of those funky time periods, the 91% of the time you were successful. But what really struck me in this study, look where you'd been most successful. If you began a 40-year program right smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression, you would have had the most purchasing power at the end of the 40-year period. That's food for thought. Why does it work this way? Because it really is a bell curve. This takes the rates of return of the S&P 500 and puts them into categories by return. Here's 0 to 10%, negative 10 to 0, 10 to 20, and it just puts them in there by year. And what you can see, going back to 1825, that it really does form a bell. If anything, the tail's a little fatter over here. Well, to put into perspective what we've just gone through, there's where we were. It was the third worst year in the S&P 500 going back to 1825. Now, there's a reason why the windshield is bigger in your car than the rear view mirror, right? You feel, and I feel like this too, I'm guilty of the blues just like everybody else, like we're going to build this whole new category out here, and we're going to start, and you know what, in reality, if you look at what happened even in the Depression, here's 1931 out here, okay? 1932 fits nicely into this category here, which is kind of maybe what we're going through this year. Those who stuck it out were up 54% in 1933. So when you put all those together, you end up right back in the middle of the bell curve. So we've just lived through a 2 standard deviation event. Now, we could have another 2 standard deviation event, but the probability is if we do, it's going to be on this side of the curve. Okay, so our financial planning philosophy gives us an inherent bias to stay in the markets. Now, that doesn't mean we're not trying to outperform within the markets, because we are. The way that we're trying to source that outperformance, though, is incrementally. Why? Well, if the S&P is going to return 10% and net of fees we can return 10.5 or 11, that 91% success rate on those financial plans will go to 100. And at the end of my career, it would be much more meaningful for me to know that all those plans, all those that are sitting in the room, and I guess watching out in the other rooms as well, that those were successful. That would be so much more fulfilling than saying, you know what, we did 12%, the S&P did 10. We beat the performance metric. The plans are the source of what we're really trying to achieve. Within that mission of outperformance, I don't think you can just pick stocks in Kansas anymore. I think you've got to be all over the planet. You got to be mindful of what's going on. Right now, you've got a couple of markets up: Venezuela, Chile, Brazil's kind of up. You've got China up. Why? You need to know why. And you need to know if it's lasting and if assets need to move there. So we are shopping the entire globe, as those of you who are clients are familiar. Additionally, risk management came back and introduced itself to everybody last year. And there are 3 things that are extremely important to us. Remember, our money's in this too, from a risk management standpoint. First, be highly diversified. Our largest holding is about 2% of assets under management. If that management of that company is fraudulent and that company goes to 0, we lose 2% of assets. We can live through that. Transparent. I just do not feel comfortable if I can't touch, taste, see, and smell what I'm putting money into. And that's come back and introduced it to everybody as well. Additionally, Mark serves on the investment committee, Mark Sorgenfrey, and we will talk to anybody who calls us, and they come through and they peddle all their investment products, and 99.9% of the time, we're not interested, but I want to know what's out there. And how many guys did we have in, silk suits that came through peddling stuff that was unregulated and outside the box, and you got to own this is the new, Rubik's Cube, and it was off the reservation. And that is where most of the lethal occurrences happened in the investment market last year. We won't have anything to do with that stuff. And it's got to be fully liquid. I do not feel comfortable owning anything that I can't get out of this afternoon. And I want my money back if it changes or I change my mind.